Hello, my name is Paul Lynch, and I'm very pleased to invite you into my home to give a reading for the Alliance Française. Today, I'm going to read from my latest novel, Beyond the Sea, which is a novel about two South American fishermen who go to sea on a small panga boat and are washed out into the Pacific Ocean after a sudden storm. What starts as a survival novel becomes an existential tale in which the two men, while doing their best to survive, are each forced to confront the limits of survival, hope, faith, and the deepest aspects of their truest natures. He becomes his hands and hands and eyes become the sea, the boat cutting a path through folding ocean. He has motored the panga between shore and lagoon, past shorebirds staved upon sandbars, turned then directly into the wind, a low haze of sea-made light. He pulls a pre-rolled joint and a yellow lighter from his pocket. As he exhales, he thinks of Rosa. Next time, you will bring limes for sure. Watching the water's endless heave that has no place of origin, watching as Hector leans upon the gunwale trim, the youth spitting into the wind, the spittle rushing like an insect. Bolivar begins to feel it under his skin, an itching here and there that is a deepening dislike of the youth. Only now does Bolivar see what is printed on the back of the boy's sweater, a skull and crossbones. He thinks Arturo is having a laugh for sure. Bolivar stares at Hector's thin attempt at a goatee beard. Then he lets out a pirate's roar. Hector turns around with a puzzled look, meets the toothy disarray of Bolivar's nut-brown grin. At 14 miles on the GPS, he passes two shore-bound boats, knows one of them for Ovidio's boat, a stripe of yellow upon white. The way Ovidio stands with his foot upon the gunwale, his finger and thumb loosening a whistle. Then Ovidio shouts two blurry words, but Bolivar stares straight ahead as though he has not seen them. Hector half stands and waves until Bolivar picks up a sardine from the bait bucket and throws it at him. He motors the boat, blinking against fine spray, one eye upon the GPS, the thumb wiping the screen. It is this that he seeks: farther ocean, the taste of salt on the lips, time receding as the hair-fine shore falls away. He tries to read the sea, but his gaze keeps meeting Hector, how the youth grips the gunwale while searching on his phone for a signal. When Hector asks how far left to go, Bolivar cups a hand to his ear and shrugs. He watches the youth turn away, watches the wind pulling at the ponytail, the hair blowing this way and that, Hector tying it back into place. Bolivar takes off his baseball cap and puts on a woolen hat, hangs the cap on a hook under the seat. When Hector turns and asks a second time, Bolivar stares at him and shrugs. It is then he sees in Hector's eyes a flashing look of anger. Bolivar turns away but holds up two tobacco-stained fingers. 2 hours more, he says. It is 5:15 when Bolivar stops the motor. The world falls into a vast quiet, just the sound of the sea carrying the breeze on its back. He rests an elbow on his left knee and shakes the stiffness out of his tiller hand. Then he curls his fingers around a joint. Hector turns with an expectant look. Bolivar sucks upon the joint and pulls from under his seat a pair of grey rubber gloves. He throws them at Hector and releases a cloud of smoke. Hector stares at the hands loose in the gloves. The sun falling beyond the sea. Bolivar says, "Now we begin." Caves of dying light in the sky. Each man dissolves into the gloom as they finish baiting the hooks. Hector feeding the unhurried line hand over fist as Bolivar reverses the panga. He watches the bleach bottle floats become dim jellyfish. He watches for the last moment of light as it beats the dark, narrows his eyes and tries to see it. He has a bet with Angel about this. Someday yet, I will see it for sure, the exact moment it happens. He imagines it making a sound, a gasp, or a pop. He cuts the mutter and listens to the world as though met with sudden loneliness. In a skim of sleep, he hears it, the maddened wind, tunneling out of dark to reach another dark, more true than dream. He rolls the cap from his eyes, looks to where the moon should be. The sea is twisting the wrong way. This is unreal, he thinks. I cannot believe it. It has come in the flick of an eye. He tries to see the illumined dial of his watch. There is a roar and then a crash as a wave strikes the boat, the water transmitting sudden cold into the bones. Bolivar bends out of the blow, wiping brine from his eyes. Hector screams awake. A quickness now of things. Bolivar, a liquid black towards the bow, the boat riding in the dark swells. He passes Hector, who has come to be on hands and knees, and he roars at the youth to bail. Hector, not real now, but an imagined thing cowering in the boat, which is also the unimagined thing. Bolivar aware for an instant of this thought as it passes through his mind, his body moving without thinking. Without gloves, he's upon the sea-cold line, fire in his hands as he hauls it. Behind him, Hector is shrieking. Bolivar roars over his shoulder at the youth to bail, sees instead Hector taking hold of the battery lamp and shining it at the sky. A world come howling from a dream. Salt stings his eyes. I am blind, Bolivar thinks. Then he flicks on the headlamp, a steeple of light in the dark. Hand over fist, he pulls in the line, hitches it to the two-headed bit, the boat pitching downward as he gaffs a shark in the mouth and hauls it. Then he unhooks the shark and sees by lamplight into the shark's eye, is met with a fleeting, unintelligible feeling of some other world. He clubs the shark on the head and throws it into the cooler. It is miracle work, and yet he moves with a feeling that something is within reach, a defined edge of his being. Already he has landed on unhooked 4 big fish, the line laden, the bait has done its work. Whispering to himself about Hector, who was cowering in the stern, screaming and refusing to bail. He thinks you knew it the moment you saw him. It was in his walk, in the way he stood, in that short little jaw of his. He becomes aware of water touching his ankles. He turns towards Hector and shouts for him to bail, but his voice is flung the wrong way. He hitches the line and walks down the boat, grabs the bailing bucket and ropes it to the under seat. The hissing salt spray. Hector's shouts thrown into whisper, "Dear God, please, I don't want to die." The sound of the wind funneling through dark space. How an hour becomes a life. Some distant part of Bolivar's mind speaks, but he does not listen. He is busy doing the work of 2 men, bailing the boat and hauling the line, gaffing fish after fish, throwing them into the cooler. Soon the cooler is half full with tuna and a few sharks. For sure, he thinks, this is the best place yet. Just another hour or so, and there will be light. He meets the blow of each wave while Hector can be heard sobbing. Now and then the youth begins to bail, but stops when hit by a wave. It is a simple matter, Bolivar thinks. Staying alive, doing what you are supposed to do without question. This boy is a fool. He will not listen. He thinks this will make for some tale back home. He will never live this down on the strip. It is then that Bolivar turns and roars, "Come on, we're going to do this." In sunless grey light, Bolivar motors the boat, blinking furiously at a compass, watching the needle teeter, watching the rollers obscure the sky. He forges a path through each ravine, opening the throttle and slowing, both of them bending to take the blow of each wave. For a moment, Bolivar can see them on some prehistoric earth met by perpetual storm. Time unraveled. No day or night, no distance to be measured. What the world once was or yet will be. He thinks of Rosa, his mind traveling down her skin towards her hips, the long bones of her thighs. This feeling now, after so many years of looking at her, to lie with her each night would be to get the pain of wanting out of the body. What you have to say to her, yesterday I was poor, but today I am rich. That is the life of the fisherman. Bolivar roars out, that's it, keep going. In a few hours we will have a few beers. The boat plunges, then recovers, and Hector whips his head up and stares at Bolivar, his face frozen by what he sees. Bolivar rising out of his bent posture with a wide laughing mouth, a great hand spread on his thigh. The boat mounts a mass of reaching sea. Bolivar roars at Hector to grab the gunwale, but the youth continues with outflung elbows to bail. Everything on deck begins to slide, the remnants of the fishing line, their bags, the buckets and knives. Bolivar locking his feet to the hull as he screams out at Hector, the fiberglass beginning to quake. He is aware for a moment of a feeling of emptiness as a mouth of ocean opens behind them. Then the sea becomes sky. He bends his head between his legs as the panga crests the top of the wave, an enormity of iced thunder breaking upon them. He finds himself seated, his hand gripping the tiller, and in the same instant, without looking, he knows Hector is gone. Quickness then as he swings his sight over the side, a thought that says, let the fool go. Yet it is then without thought that he reaches out and grabs Hector by the hair. He pulls the youth towards him as the boat continues its downward pitch. He can feel the fingers coming loose as the body is pulled away from him, his arm losing reach. There is no time to do this. He thinks, let him go. He will take you with him. It is then with his left arm that he takes hold of the gaff and roars strength into the lift, pikes the youth into the boat by the hood of his sweater. Bolivar bends under another wave, blinks the salt out of his eyes. It takes a moment to see. There is Hector, stunned but alive, an animal in the moment of birth, the mouth sucking for air, the eyes swollen tight, the body sealed in mucus. He rolls onto his side and spews water, begins to move as though met for the first time with weight and breath, his hand reaching upward to grab hold of the trim. It is then that Bolivar knows the motor is dead. He grabs the pull cord and yanks it again. The engine's power head is silent. He roars at it, then turns and bangs it with the base of his fist. He begins again at the pull cord. Finally, he stops and looks up, catches sight of a tossed bird. Every bone shouts for sleep. His eyes are stung shut. He forces his sight upon the perpetual dusk, but there is nothing to see but the coming night. A full day spent within the storm, bailing the water out of the hull, emptying the body of strength. He has taken what remains of the line and cut it in two, tied one half to each side of the boat, let it out with the floats for ballast. Now he rests with his eyes closed again, his head upon his arm. It is then in his mind he sees the cooler. He lifts his head and stares at it. Then he hauls himself up, roars at Hector for help. Hector refuses to look. Bolivar leans into the cooler's dead weight. He roars at Hector again until the youth crawls towards him. Together, they lift the cooler and turn it onto its side. Bolivar climbs in and shouts for Hector to join him. Inside the cooler, the sea throws them together. Hector's elbow in Bolivar's face, Bolivar holding his head in his hands, Hector talking incessantly to God, begging for protection, asking to be spared, the hands wringing, clasping in prayer. Bolivar meets a feeling of fate coming upon him. He thinks, so it has come to this. He climbs back out and bails furiously, then climbs back into the cooler, feeling the spent arms and legs, feeling the void of how many hours of night ahead, moving blind through the shrieking dark, lying in this cooler with Hector. It is then Bolivar begins to laugh. He thinks for sure he is no Rosa. A feeling of sleep without sleeping, or maybe sleeping without sleep. Asleep may be, and yet the body listens. The body listening with an almost seeing. The senses alert to every motion of the boat. He knows a larger vessel would have been smashed by now. Instead, the panga rides each mountainous wave like an insect. Now and then he climbs out of the cooler with his body hunched, his arms bailing heavily in the dark, seeing by the dying headlamp. A deepening sense the storm is blowing itself out. Without words, he understands the true meaning of a storm is what it reveals, how chaos describes itself, gives form to what no eye can see. What he knows now, but does not tell Hector, that this northeasterly is blowing them far out. We must be 100 miles out into the Pacific. No one will look this far. A dream of silence. He wakes to a clear sense of things, water lapping the boat, a still light. He inhales the cooler's in-baked smell of brine and fish. For 2 days and nights, he has watched his life from within some dark cell of the mind, eternity within each waiting moment, climbing out of that dark to bail water, snatching at sleep. Now he can hear Hector asleep with a rasp in his chest. Bolivar climbs out of the cooler and has to pull at his stung-shut eyes. The sun soaring over emptiness. Thank you very much.